welcome everyone. I want to welcome everyone to our annual Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion update and next steps moving forward. But before we get to that, a couple things. First, I want to apologize to faculty on the call if you were confused by all the emails about faculty meetings in this meeting. Normally faculty meet every other month. July is one of them. But we also have this meeting every year in July. And so because of so many vacations, as well as just needing some down, I think it was Dr. Melanie Bennett that said it would be okay to have fewer Zooms in July. So certainly support that idea. So we're actually, our faculty meeting in July is really this meeting. And we may move it to the second Thursday just to be consistent with all our other meetings, but more on that to come. The other thing I did want to remind folks, since our newsletter is out of not being published for the summer, again for a break, is that we have our State of the Department address in September, Thursday, September 15th, I think. You should all have it on your calendar. What's exciting this year is that our new dean, Dr. Mark Gladwin from Pittsburgh, I've invited him. He's accepted, barring any sudden last minute emergencies. He's very excited to come. I invited him to come for all or part of it. It's an hour and a half, and he was very clear that he wanted to come and hear about what we've accomplished. So he wants to hear the presentation, but also I want to give an opportunity for him to say a little bit about his vision and direction and how it might impact psychiatry or how he sees it. Comes from a very interesting background of internal medicine and clinical work as well as research. And then an opportunity for all faculty to ask questions. So I say this to say I would like everyone there, if it's possible. I'm not one for making meetings mandatory, you know that. I figure if a meeting is worthwhile, you'll come. This one should be very worthwhile, and I think it's an opportunity for us to shine in front of our new dean. I would like you to think about questions you're curious about and be prepared. I could collect questions ahead of time and provide them to him so he can sort of pace himself. So if you have a burning question you definitely want to address, feel free to forward it to me, but be prepared. The other thing to facilitate this process is I would like to have this hybrid so that he could be in person, and for those that want to come in person, much better to relate to each other, to engage, to remember people who they are instead of, again, Hollywood squares. So I hope to do that. Now, the big ballroom in the campus, the entire campus center is already booked. We couldn't get that space. So we are looking for another space that can hold at least 50 or 60 people comfortably with Dr. Gladwin and our presentation. So more on that to come, but for those on campus and those even at MPRC or wherever you want to come in person, I think that would really go a long way to relating to our new dean. I also will, every year I kind of work on the format of that, and I'm going to make it real high level because he's going to be listening, really focus on broad strokes of our accomplishments, our strengths, and then our vision moving forward a little bit. Really, it's the purpose of it is a year in review, but we will do it a little more broad. So, and Stephanie just sent me, well, that's interesting, Stephanie, a huge room on the ground floor that can hold a number of people. I would love to have it at Midtown. Very interesting idea. Stephanie, I will keep that in mind. It requires a whole lot more people traveling up there. We would certainly overwhelm the shuttle system. We'll see what we can find and keep that as an option. Thank you. Okay, so with that, let me move on. Today is our annual Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion year in review and steps moving forward. That's my title, not Dr. Forrester's. And I want to thank ahead of time right now, everyone, I'm sure you'll hear this from Dr. Forrester as well, everyone that's been involved, everyone that has sat on our committees, our subcommittees, our implementers that did a phenomenal job all last year, and also want to welcome and thank our equity champions in every division as we move forward. That's new this year. So thank you very much. Dr. Anique Forrester, who we all know, is doing her presentation today. Anique has done a phenomenal job in connecting. She's selfless in everything she does. I have found her to be incredibly accommodating if there is a difficult situation and anyone goes to Dr. Forrester, she is available. I mean, it's kind of amazing that she can be so flexible given the busy service as well that she works on. So I'm not going to spend any more time talking about Anique because we all know her and how fabulous she is. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Forrester. Anique, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rockweisel. I'm going to share my screen now so that everybody can see my presentation. Let me start the show. Here we go. So as everybody sort of may or may not know, this is the second year that we've done a year in review when it comes to our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. I think it's important to stop and reflect every single time that we are engaging in a new initiative to see what's working, what we've done well, also to see where the gaps are, where we can improve, and also to talk about where we can go in the future. So just want to remind us a little bit about where we started. So faculty turnover was really the impetus for us even thinking about having any initiative related to DEI. And in the fall of 2019, as we presented last year, there were 66 full-time clinical faculty. 3 full-time were underrepresented in medicine and 1 part-time. So everybody will be happy to know, or maybe see some progress here, that as of this June, and now we are a little bit more inclusive in our reporting, we have 88 full-time faculty. This is clinical and research, 13 Black faculty, 5 Hispanic Latinx. And the reason that we focus on Black and Latinx is because these are the people that are underrepresented in medicine. At the bottom of this screen is a link to the AAMC definition of what underrepresented in medicine means. So that's Black, Mexican American, American Indian, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, and mainland Puerto Ricans. And so I will now be very intentional about saying underrepresented medicine. So that's UIM, the URIM abbreviation will replace the term URM, which sort of said a lot of people took to mean underrepresented minority. And we're doing that to be more specific that we're talking about in medicine, to really reflect on the population that we're talking about and to really limit the minority stigma, which really gives an indication that if you are from a particular group, you are a minority regardless of where you are. And that's not really true. And so we're being very intentional and very specific. And I encourage everybody to really think about updating this terminology and utilizing this most updated term. So here, when we talked about faculty and why faculty left, we have some exit interviews, and these interviews in full are available on Teams because we've been very transparent about what people said in terms of being underrepresented and leaving this department. And this was back in, again, 2019. So you can see here some of the quotes, but again, the full exit interviews are on Teams. But the core themes that we identified related to not feeling valued within the department, lack of career direction and goals, for underrepresented faculty, and then lack of agency and voice to like directly address any issues that faculty were encountering. So that's the sort of the basis of where we started. And so just to explain why we have a diversity committee, again, DEI issues can be subtle and diffuse, and a lot of people don't really understand sometimes what it is that we mean when we're talking about DEI. It can be very specific and very vague at the same time. So we really wanted to directly address systemic issues that we identified within our department. So moving from not only faculty recruitment and retention, but also staff recruitment and retention, the need to have dedicated social justice curriculum and education throughout the department for everyone, not just for trainees, research, and really updating and identifying gaps in how research is being conducted, the questions that are being asked, but also the people that are actually conducting the research, as well as community outreach and engagement. So this is why our committee exists, and this is how we've decided to structure it. This structure may be something that we sort of reevaluate at some point and decide we need to add or remove, but for right now, this is where we are. So I want to update everybody about our subcommittees. So the first thing that everybody needs to know is that all the subcommittees are looking for new members. We're sort of at an inflection point when it comes to DEI, where interest may be kind of waning. And the people that have been doing this for the past 2 years may be looking to refresh, to do other things, or to invite other people to come in. So I want everyone in the department who has not been sort of as engaged to really think about joining our diversity committee and our subcommittees. Every subcommittee has committed to actionable change, and we're seeing the results of that, which we'll talk about in the upcoming slides. And I want to just highlight again, anybody can join the diversity committee. All you have to do is search in Teams. It's the Department of Psychiatry Diversity Committee, and you can join any of the subcommittees. Like, there's no sort of special permission that anybody needs. So I'm going to start with social justice education and curriculum, because that's something that I think has been one of the highlights of where we started. So the DEI grand rounds have been the most accessible. These are the 4 grand rounds that we had this year. Very well attended, very well received. The meetings for the social justice education curriculum subcommittee happen on the 2nd Thursday of the month at 4:30 as of now. So be aware of that, and they really were instrumental in organizing the DEI related grand rounds. We have 3 presentations that arose from the work on this subcommittee at the annual APA meeting that happened in New Orleans in May. So I participated in a workshop with Dr. Gordon, Dr. Beeson, and Dr. Hahn. Dr. Hahn presented her poster about her AAPI curriculum for child psychiatry trainees. And also a few residents, with the help of Dr. Gordon, and Marie Gustafson, Trippi Soni, Aaron Nagel, presented a poster about the DEI QI toolbox that we are working on in this subcommittee. And I want everybody to know that the workshop that Dr. Gordon coordinated was cited on Medscape this month. The author is actually reflecting on the social determinants of mental health theme for the APA meeting and how these presentations fit into that theme. So I think it's really important for us to realize the attention that our work is garnering. And the link to the article is here at the bottom of the slide. At the end of this presentation, I will upload this PowerPoint onto Teams so that you can review it at your leisure. For faculty recruitment and retention, we now have a faculty advisory council. This council meets quarterly to discuss important faculty needs, okay? And so this again sort of harkens back to how we started. So there's faculty at all stages of career that are represented on this council, clinical and research faculty. And the feedback from this council has already been incorporated into new policy changes regarding onboarding and early mentorship for faculty, okay? So this is just giving you a sense of that it's not just advice, but the advice is being translated into action. And we hope that this advisory council will directly address some of this feedback that we got from the exit interviews regarding support, mentorship, feeling valued, and a lack of agency, which I think relates to power, which we're going to talk about later on. If there's faculty listening now who want to be a part of the Faculty Advisory Council, please email me directly. But the Faculty Recruitment and Retention Subcommittee meets on the second Mondays of the month at 4 o'clock. So if you also want to be a part of the subcommittee, let me know as well. For research, there's been a few outreach events, including at Morgan State, a research happy hour, a panel discussion with the Howard County Public School System. At Research Day, which was very well attended, Crystal won again for her poster about the AAPI curriculum that she developed for child psychiatry trainees. And then we have Sonia Bonsall, who has won the first iteration of the Dana Foundation Award in her proposal to develop an integrative underrepresented minorities in research internship. And this internship will target local underrepresented medicine undergraduate students, okay, to get them more directly involved in research and hopefully start a pathway to a career. The research subcommittee meets the 4th Mondays of the month at noon. For staff recruitment and retention, one of the big accomplishments, not the only, but was a DEI commitment statement that is now included in the Department of Psychiatry, UMB, and UMMC job postings. And for FPI, a link to this statement for FPI job postings. And it's very important for us to understand that we are now being very intentional about demonstrating our commitment in staff recruitment and retention to diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is really highlighted here in this statement, which again, you can read when I upload the presentation. Staff recruitment and retention subcommittee meets the 2nd Fridays of the month at 10 a.m. for anyone who's interested. Last but not least, we have community outreach and engagement. So over this current year, they've toured with the University Community Engagement Center. There's a building partnership with Healing City Baltimore, where members have joined and attended their subcommittee meetings. I've included the link to Healing City Baltimore if you want to learn more about this organization, which is really focused on trauma and trauma-informed care in the city of Baltimore. They have a list of champions on their website, and you'll be pleased to see that there's 3 trainees from our department who are listed on as champions for Healing City: Anna Ziera, Amit Saneja, and Chelsea Cosner. And I think it's critical that in our forward-facing initiatives, that we really have people that are representing our department well. And for community outreach, their next steps is to really assist Healing City Baltimore subcommittees with upcoming listening sessions to find out how we can sort of better engage with them and really sort of meet them where they are in terms of what they need from our department. So community outreach and engagement, their meetings are the 2nd and 4th Fridays at 2 p.m. Anybody who's interested. And again, you can reach out to me directly. I can connect you to the subcommittee chairs. I also want to highlight that there is now a scholarship program through the Education Office for visiting medical students who are underrepresented in medicine. The scholarship provides up to $1,500 to defray the cost of elective fees, lodging, and transportation for underrepresented students. And our 2 inaugural recipients will be rotating on the older adult inpatient unit in September and October. Okay, so again, actionable changes resulting in us actually reaching out and engaging with students who may or may not have traditionally come to our department or been able to work with us or rotate with us. The link again to the description of this scholarship is located at the bottom of the slide. And then I just want to really emphasize that we've had a lot of DEI focused presentations that have not really necessarily come out of the committee, but just have come naturally from sort of the collaborations that have occurred and some of the things that are happening from the trainee side. So there's 7 presentations that have happened. The health equity rounds presentation that I did with Dr. Marks for the Medical Education Leadership Associate Academy here at the School of Medicine was very well received, well attended by folks from pediatrics, trauma surgery, family medicine, I think internal medicine as well. And next week, Dr. Marks and I will be presenting how to do this for the Department of Pediatrics to their trainees. So there is a sort of a natural progression and linkages that are happening because people are really presenting and talking about DEI focused topics now as a sort of a standard. And last year our theme was implementation. So many of you would have heard this. You've heard about our implementation team. So we were really moving from DEI as this sort of an abstract concept to really how can we integrate DEI within the clinical and research divisions. So thinking about creating ownership now at the working levels of the department. And really our goal was to establish DEI champions who could interface with the diversity committee and also help us now to create a system of accountability for DEI in the divisions. Our department is large. I think there are 13 divisions. And so that's a lot of moving parts, and you really need champions who are informed to kind of help spread the message and keep us accountable and keep us moving forward. So that was our theme for the last academic year. I want you to meet our implementation team. So Dana Cunningham, who worked with CL, Tiffany Beeson, who worked with the Education Office, Andre Thompson, who worked with DPSR, Kimberly Gordon, who worked with the adult inpatient units here downtown and at Midtown, Laurel Kaiser, who was working with NPRC, Pamela Walker with the PA and EAP, Maddie Marks with Addiction, Britt Patterson with Peasant Park, Sylvia Huntley with Community, and myself with Child and Adolescent, Central Admin, and the Ghoul Lab. I want you to really understand that this team did a lot of work this year, meeting with divisions, really explaining what this committee was doing, and really putting the face of our DEI efforts forward. And Dr. Rockbeisel is in this picture because she really was a part of the implementation team. Her leadership, her commitment to DEI was ever present. And I think it's important to acknowledge how much having her support bolstered what the implementation team did. Okay. So just want to let everybody know that the team did a training back in August that was really focused on leading DEI change efforts. We also did some evidence-based change management exercises to kind of help empower the team to really talk about changing things and integrating DEI in divisions. Our team met every month to provide, number one, support to each other, updates about what divisions were doing, and to share information about our progress overall. And without these regular meetings, I think that the team wouldn't have been as successful. And the implementers also were meeting regularly with their division partners to really strategize, provide support, and help to really identify those DEI champions, which is the thing that we, again, was our overarching goal. So I've been asked this question a lot. What does a DEI champion do? So I think it's important for us to get all on the same page. And I want to thank Sylvia Huntley, one of our implementers, for really coming up with the core sort of descriptors of what a DEI champion does. So the first thing is to impact change, right? So we are trying to promote DEI integration into our workplace. That's what we're doing. Helping our teams and divisions to set goals and improve their practices related to DEI, growing awareness. So like having people really understand what their responsibility is for helping with this DEI implementation, increasing the visibility of DEI. So like talking about concerns, helping with guidance, talking about best practices, and improving connections between people. Because again, we were meeting regularly. So those silos, like what's this division doing versus that division? we had people that knew and could talk about it and could connect people. And I think that that's very critical in the DEI space. And then attending the committee meetings, joining and being a part of the subcommittee meetings, critical for DEI champions to do, and then helping to kind of an ongoing basis identify the DEI needs in your working group. I do want to highlight Child and Adolescent as the first division who established DEI champions. This is back in October of 2021. And their champions are currently Tanisha Carter, Ashley Woods, and Kimberly Gordon. Critical to really have people who wanted to take this on, to really embrace DEI and DEI integration and really help the people that they work with every day to kind of understand what it is, break down stigma, break down some of that sort of hesitation around DEI, and really be a part of this entire change process that we're doing. So I want to thank Sylvia for kind of helping us define a DEI champion. And I want to thank Child and Adolescent Psychiatry for really stepping up and really being the first to establish firm DEI champions. So on a larger scale, for the Department of Psychiatry, I am the DEI champion and representative for the School of Medicine. There was a champion retreat that occurred on June 7th to share ideas with the DEI leaders from UMB, the School of Medicine, and the system. And there is a DEI champion work group for all the clinical departments within the School of Medicine. Again, another way to break down those silos, what's this department doing versus that department. And there is a plan for specific engagement with our incoming dean regarding DEI within the School of Medicine. That's going to be led by Dr. Kazada from GI. So I just want you all to know that there is a larger plan, that everything that we are doing is now being replicated and enhanced at the system level, at the School of Medicine level, at the UMB level. And it's important that because we don't exist within a vacuum. And so we have sort of paved the way when it comes to the clinical departments within the School of Medicine regarding how to do this. So we have to talk about safe space or difficult conversations. That's one of the tactics that we've stressed over the course of this past year. But I want us to be aware that in general, the psychological safety that's required to discuss DEI related topics has not been fully established in our department. So we have to think about that. We have to sort of review that, figure out why that's been like that. If you've talked to me about DEI things, sometimes when I'm bringing something up or when we're talking about something difficult, I will say, is this a safe space? Or if it's already been established for me that the people I'm talking with have given me a safe space, I'll say, this is a safe space. I feel good. I can say this thing, X, Y, or Z. And so we have to start doing that. And so safety is how we're going to have these conversations be effective. So we have to practice. That's the only way we're going to get there. I want to reassure people it's okay to say the wrong thing if you're open to learning. It's not about like saying everything perfectly, but what's more important is demonstrating your commitment to the process that we are laying out when it comes to DEI by participating. We want to also give grace to each other, minimize shaming, because everybody's at different places in this DEI journey. And so it's okay. And we can also discuss controversial topics, especially in the work setting, if it makes us better. We also have to be clear that we're not going to punish people or have negative consequences for expressing a viewpoint. That's the only way that people are really going to share how they feel. And we're going to start really having these conversations more regularly and establish that safety. So what lessons did we learn over this past year? So I'm happy to report that there are many members of this department who remain committed to DEI and have been instrumental in the successes and the accomplishments that we've had so far that I've sort of outlined for you. It's a lot of people that have contributed to this. It's not about any one person. It's certainly not been about me as the leader of the initiative. It's about the commitment that everybody has sort of maintained so far. But I gotta tell us, this is a little bit of tough love here. There are some people who have really ignored, resisted, or even subverted some of the efforts that we've made. I'm not gonna call people out, but I think that you have to look within now and really sort of like address yourself. Have you really engaged with our committee, with our subcommittees? Have you demonstrated your ongoing commitment to this DEI change initiative? That's only a question individual people can answer for themselves. But I think we all need to know that this has happened. The other thing I think is critical to know is that there's lingering fear and hesitation about DEI related change and cultural shift, as well as a waning interest. Now, the waning interest is something that naturally does occur in change initiatives, but it's also like a little bit more tinged because we've gone through a lot in these past 2.5 years. We've dealt with COVID. The pandemic has hit many of us in ways that we did not expect. There's been a lot going on in our society, and we're just not sort of in a settled place. So I get that. But the change initiative must continue. And so if we're afraid of it, or if we're hesitating, or if our interest is waning, we have to figure out why. So what are we moving towards for this academic year? For FY23, there's going to be a lot of talk about organizational equity. And organizational, for our purposes, means the Department of Psychiatry. Equity relates to power relationships. So inequity usually results when there's a power imbalance. Whenever there's a power imbalance, certain groups of people are disproportionately marginalized. Leadership, or giving somebody a title that resembles leadership, does not mean that they have power. And we're going to talk about that. And so meaningful change related to DEI for us must include equity. And so now we're going to talk about equity. We're going to review what we're doing when it relates to equity. We're going to modify and share power in order to achieve equity. And again, I'm going to tell us that power sharing doesn't mean we're abandoning leadership. Medicine is a hierarchy. And so I think if you are working in this system, you clearly understand that. But we have to figure out ways that we can share power. And so by sharing power, what happens is that we get challenged to create more equitable policies and practices to then further empower those who have been historically and traditionally left out of our impactful decision making. So this is something that may be more difficult because this is not just, do we have a diverse group of people in the room? This is much more heading us towards, is everybody that's here sharing in the power and able to impact our decision-making and our policies in an equitable way. So now I'm going to switch my screen. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second, take us to a video. I'm going to talk about what equity actually is. All right, this is Detta Jones. She is a DEI consultant, and she's going to walk us through equity.
Equity is more about.
It's not showing.
So equity is
acknowledging
Let me
and
stop
then
share.
finding ways to interrogate and revive systems or structures
that get in the way of people being able to fully participate in whatever space it is that they want to participate and that we are actively trying to create together. So here's the thing about equity. The way that I describe this in the narrative is that equity has, in the United States at least, and also in other countries that have been doing equity-based work, typically been done through what I call a deficit-based model. A deficit-based model is an assumption, whether it's conscious or unconscious, that there are certain individuals and or groups who have less ability to compete and to contribute currently because of some historic marginalization or exclusion. That historic marginalization could be legal and or social. There are plenty of ways in which we have been trying to build programs and initiatives and fund deficit-based models and programs. So scholarships or targeted mentoring programs, targeted high potential development programs, those sorts of things where we're saying this group of people needs extra special help from us, whoever us is, at doling out the resources so that they can get up to a level playing field. That's one way of thinking about it. Here's the tricky part about deficit-based equity. It doesn't work. It's not sustainable over time. It doesn't work all by itself. And so it is incredibly important that we think about the fact that one, historic underrepresentation, marginalization, and exclusion is real. It really has happened and it continues to happen. And two, we definitely need to find ways to make sure that people who have not had access to resources and experiences and structures do have access. And what that will likely mean is that we need to continue to find additional resources, right, to help support some of that more equitable distribution of access. In addition, though, the tricky part about the way that we've been doing deficit-based equity is that it's oftentimes reinforcing a connection or a relationship between the individual or group that is in the deficient space and the norm, right? It's reinforcing this imbalanced power structure that is really problematic. You know, if I am, because I am brown and because I am woman, in one of these categories or multiple categories where people think I need extra help in order to compete against the norm, then those resources might be useful to me. But the tricky part is that I am forever spending my time like this, with my hand out asking for more resources. And this person or this group or this decision maker is always the one that decides when and how and if I get access to those resources, right? And so it's not, the problem isn't that I need the resources. The problem is that I always have to go back to these individuals and or structures that have power over me because they're part of the norm as far as the amount or types or level or timing of the resources that I have access to.
Okay. Was everybody able to see that? Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back now to the presentation. So that's a bit of an introduction to equity. And again, for our purposes, we're talking about sharing power. So how can we do that? So one is by voice. So anybody who's in leadership listens to the voices of employees or people that they're supervising and uses the input to influence decision-making. That's one way. Another way is by vote. So people who are not in leadership have an active involvement in the decision-making and what the outcome is going to be by voting on it or some like majority rules kind of thing. Another thing is view. So the leadership has already made the decision and communicates it to the people that they work with or are supervising, but also what was included in the decision-making process. And so not all the time do you have to do all three, but it's important to understand that there's levels to how this can be done. I want to talk about how power has traditionally been used or misused. So controlling access to information. Typically, people who are in power do this in such a way that there's no transparency. So the reasoning for why something was done or not done is unclear to the people who are outside of the power circle. Controlling access to persons. So really, like those who are not in leadership positions can't really communicate with their leadership. They've got to go through an intermediary. And so again, the power dynamic changes because you're not speaking directly to the person who's affecting your life or the decision-making that affects your job. You got to go through somebody else. Selective use of objective criteria. This happens quite a bit. So what happens is we'll set a criteria. The person needs X amount of years of training. If we're looking at a job, X amount of years of training. But what happens is that criteria gets selectively applied to those who sort of maybe look more traditionally like we want them to look, or have the resume that we want them to have. And what ends up happening is there's a bias towards maintaining the existing policies and practices. So that criteria of the X amount of years of training really isn't the same for everybody that we're looking at for the specific job. Controlling the agenda. For us, what I want us to think about is whether or not DEI and DEI related topics are last on the list when we're talking about a meeting or a larger initiative that's going on, or completely ignored. Is the focus always on our core job function? I'm here in an administrative capacity. That's all I'm here to do. DEI is separate apart from my job. Think about that. Bureaucratic gamesmanship. We see this a lot too. Halting or subverting progress because there's some arbitrary rules that maybe no longer apply, but are used to, again, lord power over certain groups of people. And the rules are sometimes communicated as being fixed. There's nothing I can do to change this rule. I agree with the sort of spirit of what you're trying to do, but the rule says we can't. So I want us to think about, have we experienced this? And then if we're talking about equity, how can we address some of these issues when it comes to power? Also want to talk about some best practices for power sharing, which would include group learning and dialogue. Again, some people need to think about managing as much more being about relationships rather than rules, especially in the DEI space. Building trust through transparency and social cohesion. So thinking about, like, if we're dealing with a problem, being very transparent about why it's a problem, when we're trying to solve it, like really sort of engaging everybody into the solution rather than sort of dictating from on high without fully understanding how whatever sort of solution the leadership comes up with affects everybody else. And then having clear decision-making structures and processes. Again, that fosters our social ties because we're communicating. People have been transparent about why or how a decision is being made. There's no sort of back room to sort of give a sense that certain things are handled in private and then, you know, we don't know why X or Y has happened. And we can talk about how to share, assign, and delegate power. So the word power is going to be a word that we start to use a lot in this department because it's critical to the next phase of our DEI journey. So I want to stop here. I have some best practice examples of power sharing. And so I want to highlight both Stephanie Knight and Chuck Robinson here because, and for no other reason than I've personally experienced how their power sharing has affected sort of the vision around them, and also for me with Chuck, my job. So it's for Stephanie, one of the things I noticed is that Stephanie is the division chief at Midtown. She is the identified leader for psychiatry at Midtown, but she's been intentional about decentralizing that power by developing additional leadership positions at Midtown that she didn't have to do. She has monthly faculty meetings, but then there are other staff meetings that are led by the collective leadership that she has established. And then for Chuck, as my manager, his managerial style is a little bit more cooperative. So he is the leader in our division. That is very clear, but there is also a delegation of responsibilities that has happened where certain people are in charge of certain things, and it's made clear that these people are in charge of these things, and he really doesn't interfere with that. And another thing that fosters our social cohesion is the fact that we meet every week. Is that possible for everybody? No. But I think it's important, again, for that social cohesion that people really think about that. So I want to ask Stephanie and Chuck from their perspectives, what has been beneficial for the two of you in terms of sharing your power? How has it helped you as a leader? And I'll mute here so you can speak.
Well, just for the interest of time, I'll go first because, well, lags and all. For me, the biggest benefit is I don't have to think of everything. My perspective and my ability to see what's going on is totally limited by my sensory inputs and my knowledge base and all that, and those are not infinite. And having smart people available who can tell me things really, it makes it possible for me to approximate leadership. I was really grateful for your description of my leadership style. I didn't know that was what I was doing. It's really having the idea that leadership involves solving the problems is, I think, where I'm often tempted to go wrong. I think that leadership involves helping develop solutions to problems and utilizing advantages and stuff, but figuring things out inside the empty chasm that exists between my ears, that gets me in trouble. So that's it.
Thank you, Chad.
I think for me, having there's a tremendous learning curve in terms of decision making and infrastructure knowledge and kind of how systems work. And I think it's really important to get people above that learning curve really as early as possible, so that they're aware of those systems, because knowing what the status quo is, for me, is just the first step in really improving systems and making things better for everyone involved. And if you have such a steep curve when you're first starting a faculty position, then I think you get kind of, speaking from personal experience, like consumed in just trying to keep up and learn. So if we're able to share knowledge and awareness and kind of usher people along that curve as early as possible, then that's one less feat they have to overcome as they're kind of becoming a leader within the organization. I think it's also, my point of view is absolutely not the end all be all, and I can't possibly know the best course of action for the myriad of decisions that we make on a daily or weekly basis. So I need people's input, and our patients need everyone to be making decisions in a collaborative way. So I think actually just sharing the power is really the most effective way to do that.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to take us back now. I think that there are some clear advantages of power sharing. And again, everything is through the DEI lens. So it creates new options for leadership. If we sort of refer back to the exit interviews for faculty, a lot of people saw no room to advance. So rather than sort of maintaining a very strict hierarchy, but this is sort of as far as you can go, it creates some other options. So you can still maintain, again, a traditional chain of command, but offer new leaders chances to make meaningful decisions. And for DEI, it really helps us to distribute the vision at every level of the department. So there's a better ability to take advantage of people's different levels of expertise and wisdom in this area. It creates more psychological ownership of the DEI work, and people are actually more likely to engage, develop, and really what's critical for us is be retained. Not just stay for a little bit, but stay for a long time, because we're utilizing people's strengths that sort of may be there outside of a core job function that they were hired for. There are some pitfalls, though, to power sharing. So I want us to talk about that as well. So you gotta find a way to maintain accountability. So you can have multiple leaders who are given elements of responsibility, but you actually need to know who's going to be held accountable if we miss a mark, if something goes wrong, who really is responsible for this thing. And there have to be clear definitions. So whatever role you have, you're responsible for these specific duties or outcomes so that we can maintain that accountability. And then a lot of people who criticize power sharing talk about that we can't make important decisions quickly. So when you have one leader, the one leader can sort of decide yes or no and just move forward. But when there are multiple voices, everybody wants to be heard. And so if it's a crisis situation or something very specific that we have to do, leaders can sort of worry that they'll feel powerless. And so we have to be intentional, again, about creating space for people to lead, really letting them lead, and have leaders who will step back or step aside and defer to that person's credibility, that person's expertise, or their lived experience, because DEI is not just about your credentials. The other thing we have to do is really be aware of these expectations around power sharing. So just because you're sharing power doesn't automatically create equity. We have to really be ready to talk about difficult bi-directional feedback. So in the traditional system, feedback is usually given from leadership to subordinates. But if we're going to share power, subordinates have to be able to give feedback to leadership and have that really be impactful. And that's something, if you look back at what we were talking about with our faculty advisory council, that bi-directional feedback, maybe leadership wasn't always ready to hear it, but we've really sort of taken to heart that we may need to make some changes that we were not aware of before this council existed. And we have to prepare for uncertainty. So standard operating procedures are usually there because they work, because they give us a sense of security. And so we have to think, are we ready to let go of certain standard operating procedures, especially if they are marginalizing certain groups of people? And we have to really also think about, just because something is the way that we've always done it, does it actually promote equity? That's a secondary question that we now have to really ask actively. So I want to just refer us back to our statement of purpose. This statement of purpose was agreed upon by the leadership within this department. And there are some sections of it that I want to highlight because it really reinforces why we're focusing on equity and power sharing. So we talked about recreating and improving our departmental culture, increasing diverse representation in leadership positions for both faculty and staff. You've seen that reflected in the staff commitment on the job postings. We're talking about transparency, accountability, and continued education. And ultimately, we're doing all of this to improve the care that we provide to our patients and the service to our community. So we have to sort of remind ourselves of this. Why are we doing all of this? And who is this for? And I think as we find ourselves in sort of the season of waning interest, it's important for people to self-reflect and sort of get back to why this is important. This is not just because something happened in our society. The killing of George Floyd really shook a lot of people up, and sort of people wanted to do something. But if all it takes is for something to happen in society, then we shouldn't be really facing waning interest, because there's a lot of things that have happened since then. I think ultimately it's the individual purpose. Is what is included in the statement really reflective of how you feel? And do you really believe that this is important? And how are you going to demonstrate that commitment? So I want all of us to do that, to really think about that. So what's going to happen next? So we've mentioned the DEI champions. All the champions are sort of now in place. We're going to be meeting monthly, the same way the implementation team met monthly, starting in August. Everybody who's been named as a champion should have received a calendar invite from me today for our first meeting. And the implementation team will continue to participate with the champions. And now the champions are the first people who will be tasked with reviewing how power operates in their divisions, really looking at it. We're also going to continue to try to establish safe spaces for difficult conversations, develop more transparency and collaboration around our existing DEI efforts. Because again, I think people are still wondering a little bit what other people are doing. and really to help reduce the division silos. Again, DEI work is pretty universal. I think I've said this in different venues. And so there's not a lot related to DEI that should be specific to a particular division. We want to really share and collaborate with each other so that we're not reinventing wheels in individual divisions, but much more developing a spirit in our department so that our initiatives flow quite naturally. So I also want to us to remember and be aware that a shift towards equity is not a shift away from diversity or inclusion. So we remain committed to addressing systemic racism, anti-Black racism, especially given where we are, the patient population and the demographics in the city. We have to be very intentional and specific about that. Underrepresentation in leadership, and you've seen that theme sort of be reflected in many different things that we've talked about today. We also are committed to inclusive and anti-racist recruitment and retention practices, and that's something that we're going to continue to evolve and get better with. And we're also committed to addressing oppression and marginalization. And so power and equity is meant to really directly now start to talk about oppression and marginalization, because we have to think about who's been left out of our decision-making up to now. So now I want to stop share again. I'm going to show a different video. So this is Erica Purnell. Everybody can see her. She is a DEI director for a school system in New England. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about the shift that I'm describing.
We think about diversity, we often think about race and ethnicity alone. And when we do that, we actually miss a lot of what make people up. And while race and ethnicity are super central, critical, important, and core to the work, if we just see people as racial people, we're missing everything else about them: sexual orientation, political beliefs, ways of looking at the world, thinking about and solving problems. Having diversity across all those different arenas can only make us more excellent as an institution. So the work we're actually doing within the school gets better, gets richer, the discussions become deeper, our problems get solutions from all different corners. That diverse group that feels included and where there is equity is going to be able to achieve greater results than a very homogenous group. And so what inclusion and equity does is it allows us to reap the benefits of the diversity that's present. I think that transition is hard because the pain and the challenges are often invisible, because sometimes the voices of the people who are experiencing exclusion, those voices aren't promoted, those voices are silenced in ways. Diversity is about, maybe you change your admissions practices, maybe you go and look different places to get students, for example. Inclusion and equity requires us to look at our curriculum, requires to look at our budgets, requires us to look at our assembly speakers. It's a much broader change. It's changing or looking through the diversity, equity, and inclusion lens at every single aspect of the school. There are several steps to moving from diversity to equity and inclusion in a strategic way. I think the first thing is there has to be some imperative that comes from the Board of Trustees or the head of the school, so that people can start to see that this is something that is a huge priority for the whole institution. We need to figure out how we can create a sense of urgency around the shifts and the changes that we need to make. And we need to think about all the different stakeholder groups, and we need to think about what motivates each of those groups. From there, it's about then communicating a clear vision. And once we communicate a clear vision, hopefully people are getting excited, right? And see themselves in the work more. From there, then we need to figure out what skills do we need to build, what resources do we need, and we need to start providing those to people so they can start to build up their skills. And hopefully at that point we have some early wins, we have some early successes. And so what we need to do with those early wins is celebrate them and communicate them and broadcast them so that folks who are more reticent start to say, oh wow, this actually works. Look at these impacts that this work is having, that this teacher did or that staff member did. Once we really get buy-in and you get that motivation and it becomes contagious, then it's time to put in some accountability systems. Because when that motivation starts to die down, when the momentum starts to die down, as in all movements inevitably that happens, there needs to be accountability systems to keep people engaged. From there, I think we need to assess how we're doing in the process and make edits and revisions to our approach. This is really difficult work, and if it's going to take a long time, we need to be in the fight a long time. So we need to make sure that we take care of ourselves and not put too much pressure on ourselves to push things forward by next year. It's not a next year thing, it's a 5 to 10 year change process.
Okay. All right, so we're almost there, team. So what I want us to think about is a reflection on the process of cultural change, which I shared last year. So awareness, interest, engagement, action, and sustainability and growth are all required to get us to change. And I want us to understand that we are now thinking about, in the sustainability and growth section, the portion that tells us to create opportunities, to make room for other people to rise and create spaces to connect. All the other aspects of change are still happening, but this is where we're focusing this year. So the next diversity committee meeting is on Thursday, August 25th at 4 o'clock. We typically meet on the 4th Thursdays of every month, with a few exceptions for holidays. And we also typically take a hiatus in July. And I want to leave us with a quote from Wendy May, who is an author. The deepest authority is from lived experience, not trained expertise. And I think we have to really keep that in mind in the DEI space, because I think in this work, we can get really caught up on the trainings and bringing in the experts to tell us. But I think it's really our lived experiences and our commitment to changing the culture in this department that will take us the farthest. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing and I'm gonna open it up if there are any questions or comments. Again, this entire presentation will be uploaded onto Teams. All the links that I referenced at the end of slides, you can directly click. You can look at these videos in their full context. And you can really take your time to reflect on what we're talking about with equity and power sharing. I will shut up now.
Dr. Forrester, thank you for the presentation. It was a lot to unpack. So I had a lot of questions and thoughts and didn't know how to articulate everything I was feeling. But one thing that resonated was that sharing power is also sharing recognition. And oftentimes I think when we think about power, we think about just, filling people in and letting them be a part of the decision making. But even if they're a part of decision making, they may not experience fulfillment unless they also are acknowledged for the work that they do. So thank you for the acknowledgements of everyone today. I thought that really was a nice touch to just the synapses. I certainly felt this year was rewarding and challenging as an implementer for a team, and also being a part of some of the diversity committees and a DEI champion. So for me, I think when we had the discussion about equity travelers and the work that it takes, I just want to just invite people just to know that some of us may have varying views about how to move forward with DEI, but for those people who did the work this year, Some of us have experienced some burnout and really need support from you guys to step up and do more work and really think about these issues of power and equity in a different way. So I really appreciate the work that I've done, and it's been rewarding, but it's also true that there is some harm in doing this work. And so we just really have to be mindful and support each other. And someone who's new to the department doing the work, it may be even more challenging just because you don't have those support systems. So I want to just shout out to, again, Dr. Forrester, who has been a huge support, Dr. Edwards, Marissa Flaherty, Dr. Hackman. It's just been a lot of wonderful people who have listened to me as I did the work as well. I think the next step for me, and really thinking about the curriculum that was developed, that we highlighted with the APA meeting, I co-chaired it with someone else from the APA, did the social determinants of mental health. It was really important for us to kind of highlight what could be done if you have a infrastructure in a department that embraces DEI. And so having that infrastructure made it possible for someone like myself to want to create a curriculum around anti-racism. And yet there's a lot of divisions and departments across this country who are asking for help and trying to figure this stuff out, but have like content that we can share. And so I think also about DEI is sharing the wealth of knowledge that other people have already created and not reduplicating efforts. And so I encourage people to think about that. I can talk forever about this stuff, but thank you, Anik, for this presentation. And I look forward to the next stage, which is embracing our equity and power together.
Thank you, Kim.
Anik, this is Jill. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anik, that was fabulous. Just point out, we are a massive department and we have a lot of people involved in this. And I think one of the reasons that we can be successful is because there's so many of us involved under Anik's leadership and guidance, and then the whole team. So everyone contributed. So I was just thinking as you were presenting, how do we share power? And a really simple one is when I'm putting together an agenda for a meeting and I put out an email, anybody have any agenda items you want to add to our agenda for next week, I frequently get no response. And people sort of just rely on whoever's running the meeting to put the agenda together and with it. It is an opportunity for every single to think about what should we be talking about and put it on the agenda. So one simple way of power sharing is to open up what we talk about. And I just want to encourage people to do that. We have a lot of work to do, but we're doing it. We've been doing it for 2.5, 3 years now, and we're making great progress. Thank you, Anik Forrester, for all of your work.
Thank you. And as I said before, none of this work is about me as an individual. And I think one of the things that hopefully this presentation has highlighted is how many other people have really been doing this work, and how we can effectively share power with people who are excited and engaged, and come up with real results. Like, we're not just talking about it, we're doing it. So I want people to really know how much further ahead we are when we're looking at the largest school of medicine than any other clinical department because of the work that everybody's been doing.
You know, many of the divisions have their own all hands meetings or all staff meetings, but this got me thinking about the pictures I'm seeing before me is just a portfolio of faculty. And I'm wondering if there's some benefit to considering a biannual or quarterly all hands department meeting, where not only are we educated and reminded about the importance and the encouragement to engage, but also hear a little bit more about some of these other efforts. I know that might be an unwieldy group, but might be a way to also get staff involved in some committee work as well.
Yeah, I think this is something for everybody to think about, because I think that historically we've sort of been very faculty focused. And what I have realized and sort of reap the benefits of is all the other people who are not faculty, who have been up front and center in this initiative, who had lived experiences or other experiences that brought so much richness to what we were doing, that would have made this sort of less than what it is now if we had just sort of kept the focus on faculty, which is where it started. So I think that that's really important to recognize and to invite people who are not faculty to be a part of this and to really have them share in our power. Because this department has really been focused on the doctors and the researchers. But for DEI, I think we have to think bigger than that, because we're not going to get where we need to go with just sort of the doctors. We already have quite a bit of power that we do need to share.
I wonder, in that same vein, I wonder if there could be an opportunity to extend the professional credits beyond just CMEs, so that we would further kind of welcome other people who would not only benefit from the knowledge that they gain during the time, but they could also use that time for their own professional development, like nurses, social workers, techs,
Any other thoughts or comments? And again, if nothing comes up here, remember that you can reach out directly to me. I think it's important that sort of as the person who's the face of these efforts, that I maintain my position to be able to connect people and to be able to share ideas. Please join the teams if you have not already. There's a lot of information on the teams. There's a lot of resources there. I think people really need to dig into teams, especially if you're feeling sort of not quite informed. That's the place to start. All right. If there's nothing else, I want to thank everybody for taking your time to join us today to sort of hear where we are as a department. And hopefully this gets you thinking as to how you want to stay engaged for the first time, or just reinvigorate what you've already been doing. And again, I want to put out the call for not only the diversity committee, but the subcommittees. That waning interest is real. And our subcommittees are looking pretty bare. And I think it's important for everybody to think about how you want to get involved and reach out to me if you need more information. But if you already know, if there's something that sort of spoke to you today, let me know and I'll connect you with those subcommittee chairs. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.